After being away for more than 3 months, big short investor Michael Burry came back to Twitter, apparently to warn his followers that the present financial scenario is similar to the 1970s sudden inflation. His tweet, 1977 says hello, maybe alludes to the 1970s energy crisis. Due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, oil prices are currently skyrocketing, with crude recently flirting with $120 a barrel. As billboards advertise that petrol is now $4, $5, or even above $6 a gallon in certain regions, the rise in gas prices is both obvious and on customers' minds. People all throughout the world are already experiencing the effect of record-high prices at the gas pump. Well beyond fact that consumers have less disposable income, however, increased gasoline prices are a barrier to the whole economy. Everything that is moved by truck, train, or ship is impacted by the growing cost of fuel, particularly diesel. As costs for all kinds of products and services rise, energy costs play a significant role in the decades-high inflation rates that are being reported. In fact, energy, in a way, is the tail wagging the dog here, said Bob McNally, president of Rapidan Energy Group. Hey, don't panic, because after watching this video, you'll get a thorough understanding of the current energy crisis and its possible cures. Supply interruptions brought on by Russia's invasion. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has had a significant influence on the world energy system, upsetting supply and demand trends and tearing up long-standing trade ties. Energy prices have increased for so many households and companies globally, harming homes, enterprises, and whole economies. This is especially true in developing nations, where people have the least financial means to pay for it. Additionally, it poses a risk of endangering attempts to address the urgent problem of cutting greenhouse gas emissions globally swiftly enough to prevent dangerous climate change. Russia's actions have substantially complicated the situation for authorities, businesses, and entrepreneurs as they struggle to decide which energy initiatives to support, promote, or finance due to the global energy crisis and economic turbulence. Even in a planet striving for net zero emissions by 2050, it is evident to us that any acute deficits in fossil fuel output from Russia will require to be made up by production abroad. The initiatives with short lead timelines and rapid payback periods are the best candidates for this from a production standpoint. This involves using natural gas that's now flared and released, expanding output from existing industries, and using shale oil and gas, which can be swiftly introduced into the marketplace. In a world that wishes to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, no one should think that Russia's invasion can reasonably justify a wave of new large-scale fossil fuel technology. We grasp why certain nations and businesses want to advance the investigation and approval of huge long-term supply initiatives. However, because it usually takes these initiatives many generations to begin operating, they're not a suitable fit for our immediate needs in terms of energy security. Long-lived instruments also run the risk of either holding in fossil fuel use, which would make it impossible for the world to achieve its climate goals, or of struggling to recapture their initial development expenses if efforts are successful in reducing fossil demand fast enough to attain net zero by the middle of the century. The crisis reveals that gas prices aren't always modest. The idea that natural gas is inexpensive has been taken for granted ever since explorers made the initial large gas reserve discovery nearly 10 years earlier. The existing energy crisis, however, should serve as a reminder that any energy source may be either inexpensive or costly, based on a variety of factors, including incidents and regulations, which all influence energy costs. It is possible for natural gas costs to spike mysteriously due to a variety of elements, such as market manipulation, geopolitical instability, and black swan incidents. A real-world dedication to net zero by 2050 may revolutionize everything we believe we know about energy costs. There are an astounding amount of elements beyond basic supply and demand that impact whether an energy source is perceived expensive or inexpensive. More gas creates more uncertainty for energy security. Fostering gas-related investments as a cure for this dilemma should be avoided by authorities and financial entities, as it frequently delivers a deceptive or just a temporary fix. Further investments in import infrastructure, for instance, would simply increase vulnerability to unpredictable global gas rates, particularly if the Asian market proceeds to purchase at any cost, since it does not have major local gas reserves and is reliant on imports. This runs the danger of enticing and securing further downstream gas investments, which over time would result in a greater reliance on imports. By lowering the function that gas serves via energy-saving practices, powering end uses, and speeding up the deployment of renewable energy, dependency may be reduced and energy security can be enhanced. The effects of the upheaval of today. The increased near-term emissions we are currently seeing have detrimental effects on attempts to achieve climate targets. To stay within the strict carbon budgets necessary to attain net zero by 2050, they must be made up for by even higher emission cuts in the next years. Our junior and future generations run the possibility of inheriting an even more severe environmental issue as a result of the current crisis. Therefore, we must work to reduce instead of increase the load. Investment in renewable energy might benefit greatly from the unprecedented financial windfall that the oil and gas industry has received as a result of the current high prices. According to new IEA research, for World Energy Investment 2022 edition, global net income from oil and gas production in 2022 is predicted to be about $2 trillion more than in 2021, and 2.5 times the average of the previous 5 years. The net zero emissions by 2050 pathway would indeed be fully funded if the global oil and gas sector made the investment in low-emission fuels, such as hydrogen and biofuels, throughout the remaining years of this decade. A shortfall of energy might create friction between industrialized and emerging countries. Debatable issues in the current energy crisis include whether investing more in hydrocarbons, especially natural gas, which are better prepared to assist energy buyers during eras of renewable intermittency, would be riskier than using renewable energy sources to reduce price peaks during supply volatility. The truth is far more confusing. In fact, the shift to a renewable energy system is meant to both achieve climate goals and avoid the kind of resource market risk that's presently fueling the crisis. That is, appreciation and supply control of current sources of power like natural gas are still required to ensure that a crucial shift of the energy framework doesn't go off the rods and harm energy buyers in the process. However, the magnitude and sudden spread of the energy cost spillovers highlights the fact that this shift is still taking shape worldwide. The immediate effects in various regions of the world will be what to monitor, especially in the run-up to COP26. Even as the economic underpinnings fueling the crisis change over the upcoming months, while discussions of the unpredictability of fuel supply chains and the long-term prospect of renewable energy resources to lessen that unpredictability performs well in many Western capitals. That's a tough option for developing nations, some of which are under extreme pressure to meet structural energy requirements in the short term, and thus are quite vulnerable to the human toll of a recurring crisis in energy prices. Making investments to increase energy security. If we are still to meet our common climate targets, a crucial question is what the current energy crisis means for investments in fossil fuels. Are today's exorbitant costs for fossil fuels a message to send in more supply or an additional justification to invest in alternative solutions? The likelihood of supply interruptions and energy crises will increase as the effects of climate change grow. The impact can be mitigated, though, by shifting away from flimsy fossil supply chains and toward renewable energy technologies. The evaluation in the influential IEA Roadmap to Net Zero Emissions by 2050, which was released in May 2021, suggested that a tremendous upsurge in investment in renewables, energy effectiveness, and other clean energy advancements could push steady decline in the world consumption for fossil fuels to the point where new oil and gas domains would not be necessary. According to the IEA's World Energy Outlook, increasingly rapid shifts to renewable energy can lower household costs of commodity price shock by 30% by 2030 due to a decrease in dependence on oil and gas carried on by electrification and advancements in energy efficiency. Improved autonomy from unstable fuel supply chains is really what renewable energy sources provide, especially over the long term, as their percentage of generation rises and as battery technology and clean baseload alternatives evolve. Today, there's a bigger need than ever for this renewable energy investment boom. The IEA has said time and time again that a major ramping up of renewable energy and energy efficiency is the cornerstone to solving the current energy crisis and moving toward net zero footprints. The winter will not bring any winners, with the possible exception of the balance sheets of the big oil and gas companies, since energy shortages will cause blackouts and place a burden on the global energy infrastructure. The human toll will be exorbitant, particularly in the COVID-19 affected nations. Some would argue that increasing gas output is the solution to the situation, but blaming renewable energy and climate action will be unfair. Instead, the crisis highlights the need for more research on clean energy sources, such as advanced nuclear, geothermal, solar, wind, and batteries, which can sustain a clean power grid that's better protected against unstable and easily manipulated fuel chain supplies.